cloud architecture isn't new, right? But it's been evolving dramatically over the years. And the cloud architecture today, whether it's Azure, AWS, Cloud Pak for Data, Google, these are dramatically different environments in terms of their scale and the services that they're offering when you compare them against previous years. So a lot of times when you suggest cloud migration, you really kind of have two audiences. There's one audience that is all for it simply because they're looking for that scalability, that agility, right? To buy resources only when you need it and then turn off those resources when you don't need it, right? Versus on-premise purchases, right? Where you're just going to buy a whole hunk of iron and, you're buying basically a block of resources, whether you use it or not. So there's that element, that whole scalability, agility, cost savings potential. But then there's this other, and I often find that we still suffer in organizations this whole pushback of anything new. So you'll get people who are, I don't want to migrate, or what's the value? I don't understand why we have to do that. And then it gets even more specific, depending on the technology. Let's say, for instance, we're going to migrate SaaS as an example, right? So you have a SaaS geek that's been hammering out SaaS procs for 10 years, and they don't want to learn Python. They don't want to learn any of the more modern languages that can really bring them a whole new level of productivity. So you get that typical kind of pushback. I don't want to learn. It's something new. It's that kind of pushback about just change in an organization. So I don't know if that answered your question, but there's really a couple of knee-jerk reactions we get when we're talking about cloud architecture. Unfortunately, a lot of IT shops and consulting firms as well, they offer basically one way to migrate, and it's usually a rebuild, right? So we're going to take your legacy system, we're going to analyze everything, and then we're going to redesign, and then we're going to redevelop everything on that target modern cloud architecture, right? So as an example, let's use our SaaS environment. Let's say you have a petabyte of data out there on SaaS, in SaaS libraries. You've got lots of programs, millions of lines of code that are that have been developed and groomed over years. And the typical migration thought is that, okay, well, we're going to go through that entire platform, figure out what data we actually need, kind of normalize it, kind of clean it up, rationalize it, move that up, and then clean up the kind of programs, right? So that we're only taking the marrow, the real stuff that we want, and we move it up. But we're going to redevelop it all in, say, for instance, PySpark or R, Python, whatever it might happen to be. But that whole effort is a very scary endeavor for organizations, because a whole redevelopment, right? When you're going to replace everything with something new, that is typically that's a full scale development, right? So that means it comes with all of the known issues with big redevelopment processes. You've got a lot of scope creep. You've got a lot of gold plating going on, just settling on functional requirements just becomes a big issue all over again. And so it's prone to all of the typical issues that are associated with full-scale development. So it's generally the most expensive and the most time-consuming method to migrate. And unfortunately, that's typically what's offered to clients. I want to compare that, though, to groups like Gartner. Gartner is an industry research group, right? And they have identified like 7 different nuances, techniques to migrate. So replacement is one, right? There's rebuild, there's rehost, there's refactor. There's just 7 different ones that they've identified. For ourselves, Prolifics, what we recommend to our clients is at least to consider 3. The replacement is always an option, right? We can always go in there and redesign and redevelop everything, right? That's always an option. But what we also offer them are a rehost if it's available, depending on the legacy environment that you're migrating, which basically means I'm going to take exactly what we've got on-prem and I'm just going to run it in a different runtime, right? I'm going to run that same thing up in the cloud. And then the other one that we like to offer clients is refactoring. And these are not my terms. These are defined by Gartner. But refactoring says, I'm not going to change really the functional requirements of that on-prem application, but I am going to translate it, if you will, to to something that's native to that cloud architecture. So let's use the case of SaaS as an example. We take the SaaS code and we translate it to PySpark so it executes in a Databricks on Azure, right? So that's a native language. We're not going to change really the functional requirements of it, but we're just changing the underlying technology just simply to get them closer to that native architecture. So those are really the three that we recommend: a rehosting, a refactoring, and a replacement. And they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? I can do a refactoring just to get somebody up on the cloud architecture so that they can get a sense of what it's going to look like when they're there, right? It gives them an opportunity to a proof of concept or even a pilot, right? And over time, as money comes available and they understand more about the cloud architecture, if they want to do a replacement, they can certainly do it at a later time. But those three different options really provide a lot of flexibility for clients, right? And it helps them to participate more, right? Otherwise, organizations are going to have to say, you need to get off this legacy system in 12 months or else. And that usually doesn't go well, especially with other executives who generate a lot of revenue for the organization. It's hard to push around executives that way. So offering them different ways to migrate is very helpful for everybody. Sure. So, we can continue on with the SaaS example. There are tools out there. I mean, not many, but they are out there that can take SaaS code, read it, and translate it to Python, R, PySpark. Now, they don't necessarily convert everything, right? So, for instance, if I'm running a forecast algorithm in SaaS, the translator will leave a block, kind of like a vacant area, saying this is where that needs to be run. But they leave it up to the data scientist to decide which forecasting model they want to choose, right, from the vast, options that are available in any number of Python libraries. So they don't translate all the code, but they translate, on the order of 75, 80% of the code, which really is an accelerator. It means that I don't have to redevelop everything. If I want to run that application like it kind of is up in Azure, and I want to be a good corporate citizen, so if we can translate it to Python, and I want to try to do that, right? Well, these types of translators are great accelerators, right? They can reduce the amount of time. If it takes you 4 weeks to redevelop or replace a SaaS program, one SaaS program, you could probably get it refactored in a matter of, a day or two. So there is a substantial savings in the amount of time it takes. Sure. Certainly I have a blog out there on LinkedIn. I'll certainly share that with everybody. But in addition to that, we've gone through great pains of actually creating a white paper. So we call it Prolific's Agile Migration. It's really a business sensitive type of approach, right? We're not big proponents. We don't recommend that organizations just try to force everybody off, right? So it's more of a business sensitive, taking into account their agendas, the business community agendas, the business community constraints, right? They have resource constraints, time constraints, budget constraints, right? So it's a more of a business sensitive approach. And we have a full paper that we use with our own clients. So I'll be more than happy to provide a link to that as well. And then I urge everybody, you know, you don't have to believe me, although I do have I have plenty of references in anything I develop. But you know, you go out to Gartner and you ask about migration options, you'll find papers on all of that. And there's just a lot of supporting industry research that's published out there, available for free. That you know, if you just go out there and Google it and do a little bit of due diligence, you'll find that the things that we're recommending are best practices.